All right, welcome everyone to our first of a two-series webinar about the European Union Cyber Resilience Act. So we're going to be starting today with a quick webinar about introduction to the Cyber Resilience Act, or the CRA as we would call it moving forward. So alongside me today, I have Henry. Henry is a project manager here at Canonical. You probably know him from other webinars as well. He's a known figure around our webinars, and I am a risk and compliance manager here at Canonical.
Right.
So let's dig a little bit into our agenda for today. So we're gonna quickly see, what is the CRA all about. We're gonna talk about applicability and scope. So for who it's applicable and what products or which types of products are in scope. Talk a little bit about timeline. So how we got here and what is expected for the future as well. Then we're going to do the interesting part, which is talk about what is the main requirements of the CRA and discuss a little bit about some actions or some things that you can do to help yourself or your company to be compliant with the requirements of the CRA. Then we're going to talk about what's next, so what's on the horizon, right? So there will be a transitional period. So we're going to talk a little bit what will happen between now and then the actual start of the enforcing of the law, the regulation, sorry. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what could be your roadmap to compliance. What are the things you should do in order to get compliant until then. Then I'm going to share some useful resources that we have internally that can help you in your journey, and then we're going to open up for questions at the end. You are free to send your questions throughout the presentation, but we're going to get to those only at the end, so hang on a little bit, we'll get your questions. So let's talk about what is the Cyber Resilience Act. So the Cyber Resilience Act is a new regulation that has been formally approved by the European Council in earlier 2024, but it has its objective to address two main issues noted by the European Union legislators, and that has been addressed or they have expressed their concerns for a while now, which is they're seeing products with inadequate cybersecurity inherent. So like you can see products that were not secure from the time that they were placed into the market, or they did not have a robust design process. And also companies were failing to provide security updates to such products or to such software that are embedded into those products. So it came out as a problem that customers were unable to determine which products are safe or cyber secure, or how could they set up in a way that is actually protected. So imagine in a context you have like a smart device in your home and you don't know if that device is safe, or you don't know how to set it up in a safe way so you can protect your data or the other devices at your home as well, and in a broader sense, all the other things that that device connects to. So the CRA will eventually help safeguard consumers and business buying or using products with digital elements that are placed in the European Union market, which now we'll call them PDEs. But what makes a PDE, right? What takes for a product to be considered a product with a digital element? So the main premise is that this product is connected to other device or to a network to exchange some data. And that could be either a direct or indirect connection. It could be physical or like a wireless radio connection as well. It includes what the regulation calls remote data processing, which means that if you have an app on your phone that can control your smart home device, is also considered a PDE. And then the other premise is that a product that is made available on the European Union market, regardless of where your company is located, right? So maybe you're in Brazil like me, but you're selling products in the EU market. So the CRA is for you. Your product will be classified as a PDE and then under the scope of the CRA. Also, regardless where it has been developed or produced, right? So either You have a product, well, that maybe it's not produced in the European Union, but still it's marketed there, it's placed on their market. You're going to be required to follow the CRA rules. And again, I call out here that no solutions that you use for internal purposes are not considered PDEs. So even though no, it could classify as some of the product categories that we'll present a little bit later, if you just use it for internal purposes and you don't make available for customers in the European Union market, then it's not considered a PDE under the scope of the CRA.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that this is actually a really, really broad and all-encompassing definition of products. Like almost everything these days that is electronic that is sold will have some ability to connect to other devices and share data. And as Joao was talking about, that brings it under the scope of the CRA. So, you know, these days you buy a home appliance like a fridge or a vacuum cleaner, they all have, you know, digital elements which communicate over the network, printer, a sat nav, even a mobile phone application. These all, you know, communicate and process data. So it's pretty all encompassing. And that kind of means that the rest of the scope of the CRA is going to be quite generic to start with, because there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach for all these different sorts of products. So it's worth bearing in mind. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Indeed, it's very broad, and I think it's by definition or in purpose to be that broad and to tackle all of those products that are more and more interconnected or connected to a lot of other devices and networks and exchanging a lot of data. So as we said, the scope is all products with digital elements in the EU market, but they are then divided into 4 categories, which is what they call default products, which they claim to be 90% of the products that fall under the scope of the CRA. There are examples, right? So one of the call-outs here is like hard drives, smart speakers, or wearable devices. Those kind of things are considered default products under the CRA. The next one is important products class 1 and important products class 2. So important products, they are considered important because they provide a critical function or a role to the cybersecurity of other products. And that classification or nomenclature of important products aims to follow also the NIS2 directive as well. So they align on what are the definitions and nomenclature between all the legislations. But they're pretty much products that serve a purpose for the cybersecurity of others. So you have here on the class 1, password managers, operating systems, also some sort of wearable devices as well. And then important products class 2, you have hypervisors, firewalls, and intrusion detection systems as some examples of that. And then the critical products, they are called that way again, doing a connection with the NIS2 because they are critical for or a critical dependency of critical entities as defined under the NIS2 directive. And also, if those products are compromised, the impact is huge, either to national security or national infrastructure, or also to other things like harming to mass individuals and that kind of stuff. So a list of products is provided in the annex. So there's like a comprehensive list of products, but those are still also being discussed, further definitions of what could be like considered like a runtime system. For instance, this is a hot topic that is going on, but there is already a list provided there, and those are being actively discussed with the regulators as well to further define and provide more clarity on what is considered a particular product. Sorry, Henry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, my interpretation of these product classes is that there's always going to be some level of interpretation depending on how the system is deployed. For example, if there's a firewall in a critical product, then maybe that you can have to be extra secure to make sure that one is up to scratch. So I think people are going to have to apply some common sense and take into account the deployment strategy and where these products are being deployed. Yeah, my interpretation is that this isn't going to be absolutely hard and fast, but you need to apply some common sense.
Indeed, the context, as you said, is very important, right? Like where are you deploying those products or for what context are they being used, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely nuances into that, and there are still some gray areas. And the legislators are actually holding or held consultations. They're planning to hold more consultations moving forward with people that are aiming to help define even better this and try to eliminate as much gray areas as possible. So if we just want to quickly separate important from critical products, what you see is that, as I said, important products will fulfill essential functions to cybersecurity of other products, and there's a risk of an adverse effect and potential harm to users if something happens to that product or to that device. So they are required to have stringent checks, and also the focus is mitigating those digital vulnerabilities related to those. And the critical products, they are deemed as key for safeguarding digital and physical infrastructure, and they will pose a significant threat if they are compromised. So they need to have also heightened security protocols.
So I wonder, Joel, could you just describe very briefly what those NIS2 directives is about? I'm not sure if everyone is completely familiar with the NIS2, as it's quite a new thing as well.
The NIS2 is a new cybersecurity directive that is being discussed in the European Union, and it's going to be then a set of guidance for member states to actually implement at their national level. So again, more cybersecurity requirements. And the NIS2 defines the concept of critical entities, which are entities that are critical to safeguarding the infrastructure of that member state or that nation, or pose a significant risk to national security and that kind of stuff. So the NIS2 will definitely provide more guidance into that as is adopted at the local or the member state level. But they're aiming to improve cybersecurity as a whole in the whole European Union.
Yeah, I guess it's probably similar to what in the UK you would describe as the critical national infrastructure.
Yeah, pretty much the same.
Okay.
So just as important as what in scope, what's out of scope. Right? So there are some exclusions that or categories of products that are out of the scope of the CRA. So first example is websites and pure SaaS products. So they are excluded from the CRA as long as your SaaS product does not pose remote processing functionality for a PDE. So if you have like a SaaS that you can just log in and control your smart home device, then it's a remote data processing, so it is included. But a pure SaaS offering is not considered in scope of the CRA. Products that already have a cybersecurity, resilience, functional safety regulation already in place are out of the scope. So there are some sectors like medical devices, motor vehicles, or aeronautical equipment that already have legislation or regulation that are related to that, so they are out of the scope of the CRA. Important to note that they're out of the scope of the CRA, but they do have their own requirements for cybersecurity. They're not exempt from cybersecurity or from having, as Henry said, the good common sense of cybersecurity practices applied to them. There are what they call special purpose PDEs, which are products that are exclusively developed for national security. Those are also put out of scope. And then there is free and open source software with the caveat that it needs to be developed or supplied outside the course of a commercial activity. And the CRA struggled a little bit with that, like how to properly fit open source in the context. And what they have eventually come up with, if you're like a developer contributing to a project, you're not required to abide by the rules of the CRA. If you are a maintainer, but you're not actively monetizing your product, then it's okay as well. You're not under the scope of the CRA. But if you are engaging your product in a commercial activity, and that means like consulting services, support services, or even like helping companies to implement that inside their own products, then you are under the scope of the CRA. There is the introduction of the new steward role as well. So it means that open source companies or consortiums or associations that can help strengthen that environment for the open source providers then they can be called self-stewards. They'll have less stringent requirements, but they still need to abide by some minimum security baseline and be the guardians of that open source software moving forward.
Yeah, I think this seems very sensible to me, Joel, doesn't it? So like people who are just developing software for the love of it and making projects that they just want to contribute to, that's not within the scope. The scope of the CRA is specifically people who are bringing a product to market with the idea of it being a commercial business. So yeah, if you're just doing a hobby project at home and you're just dabbling around, it's not anything to worry about particularly. But I think it's also worth noting that, as we'll cover in a little bit later on, a lot of the guiding principles of the CRA are actually very, very sensible and rooted in solid security practices. So actually, if you're contributing to a project and you have a good cybersecurity awareness, then you're probably actually going to comply by default. So it's worth keeping in mind.
Exactly. So if you looked at the CRA in this first drafts, it kind of put everything on the same bucket, right? So no, you wouldn't end up with the requirement to have such stringent checks or such processes, a high burden of implementing so much stuff just to be compliant with the CRA. But you're just like in a small open source project that is not monetized at all. So that change is good. But also to your point, it's just a common set of good practices. So if you have like a good development process, you're probably pretty compliant with the CRA. You don't know it yet, but you easily compliant just having a good set of practices under your development lifecycle process, your documentation, and so on and so forth. And we'll dig more into that. So just again, for whom the CRA is applicable. So it's applicable for anyone who is involved in the process of building or delivering a PDE in the European Union market. So it means manufacturers, which are the actual entities that produce and deliver these to consumers. It can be the providers. So there are entities that provide components or software that are used by manufacturers. And that is when I have the little note there that says software includes both proprietary and open source as well. And also importers and distributors, so entities that are bringing products from outside of the European Union, we're placing those into the market. So remember, as we talked before, like it doesn't matter where it's produced or where your company is at. If your product is placed into the European Union market, you're under the scope of the CRA. So let's go back a little bit and try to understand how we ended up here today. So in March 2022, the member states of the EU agreed that there should be a law around that, and the EC president has addressed cyber resilience as an issue for the European Union. So a little bit later in September, there are several articles proposed and kickstarted the processing of developing the actual regulation. In late 2023, so around mid-December, the political agreement was reached, and then it entered the final stages of the approval. So that, like, between September 22 and December 23, like, majority of the discussions happened. And also it was very low, the open source community voiced their concerns, and they were able to change things a little bit to, consider better accommodate the nuances of open source into the regulation. Now in 2024, in March, the European Parliament approved with like overwhelming majority, but now it needs to enter into force. So now we were waiting for it to be published, and then the regulation is actually going to enter into force, and there is nowhere formally the clock starts for everyone. So this is expected to happen around September, October of this year, and then the periods will kickstart, which is the actual enforcement of the law. So as a general perspective, companies will have 36 months to comply, and then the CRA will become enforceable. But the reporting piece or reporting obligations will start a little bit earlier. So within 21 months, so around middle of 2026, companies will already have the obligation to report security incidents and vulnerabilities to ENISA, which is the European Union Cybersecurity Agency. So let's get to the interesting part, which are the main requirements. of the CRA. So they kind of roll up into four main obligations. One, risk assessment, documentation, having your conformity assessment, and do your vulnerability reporting. But the first one, risk assessment, requires the manufacturers to ensure that the products that they are placing in the market are delivered without non-exploitable vulnerabilities, secure by default configuration, and with limited attack surface. On top of that, you must minimize the processing of data. So that means, making sure that your processes are in place, checks, balances, analysis, risk assessments, and all that kind of thing are pretty well documented. And for at the end, you and your company are comfortable that you're placing a good secure product at the market. Next one is documentation. So one of the burdens that the CRA introduces is the extensive need for documentation. So you need to document your product design, delivery process, how are you going to handle vulnerability management, what's your risk assessment like, and also have your conformity, your declaration or your attestation documentation alongside with the product as well. And last but not least, software bill of materials. So you need to understand exactly what's going into your product, understand dependencies, understand what are the implications of something that might be wrong with like an open source project or a library or a third-party software that you use, and then it's going to have an impact on your product at the end. The third one is conformity assessment. So it's kind of not the easiest, just do your job right, and at the end, you're going to get a certification. But that can be done in two ways. One is a self-assessment. If your product is not important or a critical product, you can do a self-attestation based on your internal control environment. But if not, then you need to have a formal certification, which can be an European Union cybersecurity certification, which is coming. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But also, you can call up an auditor, an external party that is independent of your process, and says, "Hey, please come here, audit me, and provide me the certification." And the last one is vulnerability reporting. The CRA introduces tight deadlines for reporting. So any actively exploited vulnerabilities or security incidents that affect your product must be reported to ENISA within 24 hours after becoming aware. That means, raising the bar a little bit on how you identify, analyze, and then, communicate that into the regulatory agency. So it means that stricter requirements are coming. They are pretty much a burden for all organizations. So you need to get started on your journey to do that.
Yeah, I think that for me, that 24 hours is going to be quite a tough one. So within Europe, we've had the GDPR requirements for some years now that if there's a data breach that impacts your end user customer data, then that needs to be notified to the Information Commissioner's Office within like 72 hours. But now there's 24 hours of vulnerability reporting. I guess this is probably the most obviously burdensome operational aspect of operating a product in the marketplace. It means that you need to have a constant awareness that if there is anything going on, if there is a security problem, then you must have people on hand to be able to respond to it and then and report it and act appropriately. So I think this one will be a bit of a challenge for some people going forwards.
Exactly, and this has been a point of pushback. Again, not only from the open source community, from a broader perspective, because one of the good things about vulnerability response or remediation is that sometimes you do actual coordination, between you, vendors, and other involved parties. And some people think that there might not be time for that to do an actual good coordinated vulnerability response if you need to report that in 24 hours to ENISA. But they lost the battle, and now we have this requirement to actively report. Doesn't mean that those efforts won't be done, but it's going to be a little bit trickier, and as you said, it's going to be difficult for some people, for companies out there to adhere to such a strict deadline without changing anything on their processes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's also worth thinking about the nature of vulnerabilities that, I mean, especially, we're talking within an open source ecosystem coming from Canonical, but the vast majority of vulnerabilities that we come across are ones that people have reported in good faith as a problem that they found and that needs to be fixed, and that the industry and communities can work together to fix them before publicly disclosing it. And these ones are not being actively exploited. Someone has just found a problem and has reported it. So I think there are actually quite a small number of sort of the 0-day type attacks where people just pop up and exploit something out of the blue, so to speak. So hopefully there'll still be time for most vulnerabilities to be triaged properly, and there'll be the typical coordination between interested parties. So yeah, I don't think we should panic yet, but it's certainly something to be aware of.
Indeed. Now what we're going to do is going to drill down a little bit on those 4 requirements, and what we're trying to do is try to translate that into actionable insights for the audience here. So if you get the first one, you get the risk assessment, and the requirements of the CRA are, you must have a product with no exploitable vulnerabilities, which is secure by default, with a limited attack surface, and you should protect data and also minimize data processing. Now, what that could translate to, having a good software development lifecycle, do your vulnerability management during your release process, do a threat lab pen test, whole threat modeling sessions to understand better your risks, or like where are you most exposed. Try to apply hardening, so make sure that your product is secure by default once it's placed in the market. You need to provide what is a good level of secure configurations for your users. At the end, they need to know, as I said earlier, how to properly set up and use those products. So you need to also have that define like what a secure configuration means for that device, or okay, what if the user wants to take it to the next level, or they want to deploy it in a different context. As Henry said, like maybe it's a mission critical environment, maybe something highly regulated. So there are nuances into that as well. And then to understand a little bit better the data processing or the data protection, the recommended ways to do a data protection impact assessment. So usually you involve your legal team to that, but there's a set of processes that you can do to understand what is the actual data that this product or this device is processing. Is it under general data privacy regulations? Is compliant? Are we actually minimizing everything? Or are we doing anything else than we are supposed to do with this data?
I think it's maybe worth for a second talking through about that sort of no exploitable vulnerabilities section, because I think initial drafts of the CRA were saying products should ship with no vulnerabilities at all, which obviously sounds like a very good position to be in. Why would you ship a product with vulnerabilities? That sounds pretty terrible. But I mean, I can tell you, like having worked in security for for 20 plus years, people find vulnerabilities everywhere. So I kind of was thinking earlier about the example of a car. You might have your car, it's going to be pretty safe, and you think, well, actually, but this little part of the car here is made of plastic. There's a lot of plastic on cars, and it would be better to have a metal part. That'd be surely safer for the car. But actually, people have done a sort of an analysis, a risk assessment, to say no, this part of the car is okay to be plastic because it's not critical. And that's kind of the same with the software. There might be some bizarre vulnerability in some program which never gets used, or has no sort of attack surface outside to the internet or to end users and things. And it might be deemed that no one could possibly do anything with this vulnerability. So it's actually probably better just to leave it and not try to fix it, which may break other use cases and break workflows. So this is a lot about what we do at Canonical, is making sure that we triage and assess each vulnerability and make sure that the ones that can be exploited we fix, and the ones that can't be exploited, well, it would just be a Herculean effort to try and fix them all for no conceivable gain and at the high risk of breaking every single package on the system. So that's kind of what it means by no exploitable vulnerabilities. So the product is definitely safe, but if you run some scanner, you might discover some sort of low impact vulnerabilities and bizarre packages which you didn't know you had. But it's going to be fine to use the product.
Yeah, that was so the first draft, right, sounds utopic, right? Products with no vulnerabilities. A lot of people, when they read that, like, what? I need to fix all of those low vulnerabilities, and as you said, could break other things that I'm not really sure. So that could open like a can of worms, or even open the door to then a higher critical vulnerability because I fixed this, but then broke the other thing, like mess with the workflows and can mess with the general usage or expected behavior of the product. So that was something that was actually good that they changed, from the initial text to the one that was approved. because if you then you draw a circle around, okay, these are the actual things that are being exploitable or are actually being exploited out there. So hey, these are the ones that should concern. And then if you do a good risk assessment, as you say, like, hey, this vulnerability here is like, okay, it's not worth like a scenario for this to be exploited. It's not feasible at all. And so no, let's just live with that. And that, as I said, doesn't mean that the product's not secure. As I said, if you run a scan on some of the products that says they are CRA compliant in the future, you'll probably find some low vulnerabilities. If you find higher critical, yeah, that's a problem. But if you find like some low vulnerabilities hanging in there, this is probably why. So next one, documentation, which is somehow a burden, right, for everyone to actually go and thoroughly document everything that they do or document their processes. Is something that most people don't like to do. Me as a compliance person, I love documentation. To be honest, I love to work on documentation, but I know that it's not the case for most people out there. So this introduces somehow a burden to make sure that you have all the documentation in place. So this means, documenting everything that you do. It doesn't need to be, explicitly revealing details of your organization or like your infrastructure, that kind of thing. But, need to document in a way that users will read and understand how that product was developed, how vulnerability management is going to be handled, how you're going to deliver patches or where they can report security vulnerabilities and what you're going to do about it. Again, for that modeling, just make sure that you have internal policy that says how you're going to do it, any methodologies or like any refresh cadence and stuff like that. And then the SBON is the tricky part. Okay, you need to list all the components under that product or that software, and then understand dependencies and vulnerabilities both in human and machine readable way. So these, I guess, poses the most burden in all of that because it could be the trickiest part to achieve. And then, just having your audit or attestation reports actually something you're just going to ship with the product. It's ready to go. You actually want to prove to people that, hey, I have passed this certification or I have passed this audit. So it's pretty straightforward. But I think, the trickiest thing here would be the SBON writing.
Yeah, I guess so. But I mean, it's going to be the case that there'll be tools available to help you out with that. So if you're using an off-the-shelf product, it should come up with its own SBOMs, and you can incorporate that into your products and things. And so it might sound a little bit scary, but it's mainly about very much tying into that vulnerability piece to make sure that when you ship the software, there aren't any known exploitable vulnerabilities. How do you know that? You just tell people what's in the software, and that's kind of what the SBOM is all about.
Awesome. So again, the conformity assessment is pretty straightforward. We talked a little bit about this, but if you have a product that is classified as a default product, then you just need to do a self-assessment based on your control environment. For the rest, you need to have what they call an independent body assessment, but it just means like, okay, a certified auditor can come in and attest to your processes and your evidence and so on, or you can also achieve EU certification. They are trying to come up with a European Union cybersecurity certification scheme that will cover most of the new digital regulation that is coming or is to come in the near future. So hopefully, you just do like this assessment once and you get your statement of compliance with a lot of digital regulations in the European Union in the upcoming future.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth just sort of pointing out at this point, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, Joel, but I think the EU certification scheme is not really fully fleshed out yet. And I think some of the concerns people have are that unless there's some sort of dramatic increase in the number of bodies able to do this assessment, when the CRA kind of rolls into practice and everyone needs to take part, a lot of people are going to be shipping important products, and actually there might be the case that there are 50,000 products that need to be certified and only 100 people who can certify them. So yeah, I think the first stage is going to be that self-assessment, and then as and when there's enough certification capability, then people will move in and be able to do that. But yeah, even if you need to go down the certification route, the self-assessment will be a very important first step.
Yeah, indeed. I guess the first thing you do before you call an external auditor, you check yourself, right? You do a self-assessment and then try to understand how does your processes look at before you call in an external auditor? This is usually the process, and that is true for the CRA as well. As you said, the cyber certification scheme is not up and running yet. So last I heard is that ENISA is trying to develop like a first draft for people to comment on it, and it should be based on the common criteria. I know we'll have probably two uh, assurance levels is what they're calling. So you may look at like, hey, maybe the first version, or like you have a critical product, you would be obligated to actually get the highest level of assurance. So that is not defined yet. And there also the possibility to uh, certify like line of products or a set of products under an overarching scheme. So you say like, hey, these are my processes, and they cover all of these products that I'm putting in the market, and then you can do a certification once, and then it will tackle some of your products or all of your products, depending on the case. But again, that is also to be seen. As Henry said, there could be a problem in the near future that there are so many products to certify and so few people to actually do it. Then the regulators will need to come up with a solution for that, and that could be okay. Just do a self assessment. Make sure that you're covering your bases, and then you get like a period of time to get actually formally certified.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Then the vulnerability reporting, which we discussed also. So report to ENISA within 24 hours actively exploited vulnerabilities and security incidents related to the product. That is somehow easy, but the hard part here is the tight deadline, right? So vulnerability management, you need to define your channels for intake, how you're going to do triaging, what's going to be your mitigation/remediation, SLA, and processes related to that. How are you going to communicate those to your user base or to the people that are actually using your product? And then how you're going to issue and deliver those security updates and patches to your customer base or your devices out there. There's also a need to a good implementation of a good incident response process. Having playbooks already documented and people trained on those, having a communication plan, and also good, straightforward, already defined reporting procedures will help you be more effective and meet this tight deadline of 24 hours. If you wait for an incident to happen to figure out what you're going to do, then you're doomed to fail the requirement of reporting that in 24 hours. So the more you can plan ahead, define those processes, train people on it. Hey, in case something happens or in case we have an incident, this is the playbook. This is how you're going to run it. This is how we're going to communicate people. This is how we're going to report it to stakeholders, regulators, whoever is the involved party. So getting that ahead of time, being able to actually make people familiar with those, train them, maybe do some tabletop exercises as well, are a good way to go to here. So make sure that you're prepared, and then if something happens, you can meet those tight deadlines.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully this is not too surprising. Anyone who's been involved with, looking at things like GDPR have, already had to come to terms with a lot of these steps. Because that involves, the security incident response, and you develop your playbooks and things. So I mean, having done this already myself, I know it's it might sound a little bit dry and daunting, but actually it's quite a fun exercise. To really sit down and think, what if this happens, what do we do now? And go through the steps and the processes, and is it reliant on one person with one key or something, or do you have everyone's phone numbers to contact in the emergency and things? So I think it's worth doing as an exercise.
Yeah, like in my experience, all tabletop exercises reveal something that you didn't know or didn't think of before. There's always someone with like, hey, what if this happens? Or what about this scenario? We didn't consider this, and so on. And then as Ham said, you can be trapped in a situation that, hey, I need to contact that person, but I don't have their contacts easily available or readily available if I need it. Or like, hey, I don't have access to the policies or to the playbooks in a straightforward way, or like somewhere I can easily access that if something is happening. So there are some bits and pieces that you must consider, and the perfect way to do that is just sit down, do a tabletop exercise, and try to brainstorm around it. Now let's talk about what I call the roadmap to compliance, but what steps you should take in order to get there, in order to be compliant. Hopefully earlier, but in 36 months you're already compliant. So step one, know your product, analyze your product, right? First thing, is it even in scope, right? Because if it's not, then maybe you don't need to do everything. As we said, these are good common security practices that you should implement regardless, in my opinion. But you don't need to take the whole burden if you don't have all the resources, or if you're not obligated to do that. But if it is, do a product analysis, is in scope, and what is the classification as well, because that matters in terms of the requirements, the certification process, and so on and so forth. I think there are companies that have different products that might fall into different categories. There should be a per product analysis, right? Your process could be the same for all of those, but per product analysis is always helpful to understand what needs to be done for each product. Next one is checking your supporting processes. So what is the product design, or the SDLC, looks like? How do you design, develop, test, and make sure that those products are secure before being placed into the market? What is your vulnerability management looks like? We just talked about this. So do you have processes for taking the reports or vulnerability reports, and then how you're triaging that? What's your SLA for remediation? How you are communicating and making those security patches available. Next one is do the risk assessment. Take a risk-based approach and get your assurances. So am I comfortable enough that my product is safe and is being placed in the market with a secure configuration, right? So secure by default. So that means, do I have the right checks and balances throughout the processes to make sure that this is actually a secure product? It doesn't have any exploited vulnerabilities and so on. It might have some, slow vulnerabilities hanging in there, but that's acceptable and it's doable as long as you document that, right, in a good way. So your processes need to be, you need to be able to clearly demonstrate that you took that process, analyze the product, do your vulnerability scan, do your pen test, make sure that analyze the findings, and you did a very good job in mitigating those that are actually worth mitigating, and know the product is secure. Next one is documentation, right? So everything that we just talked until now needs to be documented. So your processes, do you have good documentation about your processes? How you're documenting your risk assessment? How is that good enough from a perspective that you can demonstrate the reasoning why you took some decisions? And I'm all about risk-based decisions, but those need to be well documented. And then getting your certifications or your manuals, so your hardening manuals, your secure operations manuals. How are you teaching or communicating to your users how this product is safe, and how can you make it safer if needed, or how can you operate it in a secure way? And also have your response. So as Henry said, there might be tools out there, but you still need to understand everything that's going into your product and manage the dependencies between those. Oh, sorry, wrong button.
That's okay. So I think one question that comes up is, within, obviously within the scope of this, people need to provide security updates for their product and, and support it in the marketplace going forward. Do we have a feel for how long that needs to continue for each product? So if I sell something, my widget X, how long would I need to support that for going forwards?
Until the lifespan of the product. So from the moment you place it in the market to the moment you actually remove that, or you just replace that with a newer version of that. So hey, this is end of life now. So until the moment you say that is end of life. So it is a whole support throughout the product life cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether, just how closely people do follow that. Because I know it's not necessarily the most sort of exciting thing to support all products, but it is very important.
And it should be a tough call, right, when you say that this is end of life, and then I won't support it anymore. So you expect friction from customers and that kind of stuff. So it's always a tough decision. But we're not required to support it through the whole life cycle. So this is somehow a burden, as you said. And then the last piece, get your attestation, get your stamp of approval, get your certification, and that means doing a readiness assessment, maybe calling in your internal audit to run a self-assessment on yourself, and then doing your external assessment if needed. And now to top that off, just do that in this whole continuous improvement cycle. So again, things change. The threat landscape is always changing. Your devices are changing. Your products are changing. So it's good to refresh that once in a while at in a defined cadence. So we're iterating over it, and making it better every time. So then what's next, right? Real quick, because I know we took a while, but I wanted to leave time for the questions at the end. So what's on the horizon is that there's going to be what they call a delegated act that will aim to amend or supplement less essential elements that were not maybe 100% discussed or made clear when the legislation was being formally approved. So that means eliminating some of the gray areas. Next one is actual implementing act that will lay out how this is going to be implemented all across the board. So it should provide conditions for uniform implementation across the whole span of products. And for that, the lawmakers are definitely going to hold consultations as they have been so far. But they're going to involve people in the conversation, trying to see what's the best or how can we make this the best. And as we talked a little bit about this, but it's the certification scheme, right? So they are trying to figure out how's that going to look like. So NISA is working on something, and then what they're going to do is based on the common criteria, at least is last I've heard, and then try to come up with what they call this protection profile, where you can have an overarching set of processes that handle a set of products, and then you can do your certification once, but that's going to be applicable to your whole set of products under that overarching processes, which they're calling our protection profiles. And then the expectation also is to have those certification bodies appointed. As Henry said, we might be in a context that there are so many products, but few people to actually issue those certifications. So they're trying to figure out exactly how they're going to handle that as well. Last information I have is that manufacturers should be able to start applying for certification in January 2025. I'm not sure if that's going to stick or not, but this is the latest information I have on the subject. But more to come. We have like a transitional period of 36 months. A lot of things can happen. And then last slide is just sharing some useful resources that we have that can help you understand a little bit deeper the CRA. So there are 2 blog posts from our CISO that talks about the Cyber Resilience Act. The first one is just a comprehensive breakdown, so a little bit more details than this webinar. And the next one is how does that relate to open source in a broader sense as well. We touched a little bit on that on this webinar as well, but now you have like a full write-up on her thoughts on what does this mean for open source. And also I would to call out there's a next webinar, as I said in the beginning, that is specifically related on how the CRA will impact IoT devices manufacturers. So I'm going to be partnering up with our head of field engineering for devices, and then we're going to do a good conversation as this one about how the CRA will impact particularly this type of manufacturers. So it's next week, same time, 5 p.m. CPT. There's a link to register there as well. And also there should be an announcement popping up in the presentation with the link for you guys to register as well. Okay, and that's it. Thanks everyone for hanging in until now. We're also going to take a look at the questions now, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Mm-hmm. So I've got the first question for you as well. What are the risks and fines for getting it wrong? And if you fall foul of these regulations, do you know what the ramifications would be of that?
There are no definitions yet, but it should be the same as you would expect, like a percentage of your global turnover capped to a particular amount.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, there's some other questions have come in. So this one actually sounds quite tricky. So Fonny is asking, if I host a server in the UK, it's the backup DNS server if he loses the servers in South Africa. So must that server also be compliant with CRA?
I think that falls under the remote data processing concept, right? You still be using to support a product that is placed in the EU market.
So it sounds that's probably a yes.
Yeah, I would think that yes. Like, okay, it needs also further understanding of the context, but from the information provided, I will rule that those is supporting a product that is being placed or delivered in the EU market, with the caveat that it's UK. So
UK, yeah, not necessarily EU, unfortunately, at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
So another question. So Alvin has asked, would the requirements for the likes of Microsoft, Google, and Apple be the same as for Ubuntu? And what guarantees do users have that the CRA certificates will provide a layer of, if any, protection for users?
Yeah, so the requirements are the same based on the product classification. So yes, if you're you're providing the same product as Google or Apple, you're going to be required for the same level of assurance or scrutiny that they will have. As for the second part, so the idea is that once you have your product certified, you're going to be covering all of those things that we talked about, and that should make the product secure, meaning that it's free from actively exploited vulnerabilities. You are delivering it on a secure by default configuration, and you're telling users how to safely operate that. So in general manner, this should provide a reasonable level of assurance that these products are secure.
Yeah, and I guess sort of taking that a step further, like as we mentioned at the start of the talk, one of the aims of the CRA was to provide users more informed choice about what they're able to buy. So as and when people do the self-assessment and get the certification, they will be requested to provide documentation like Charles been describing. So it'll be kind of up to consumers to have that ability to make the choice. If you look at Microsoft's security development lifecycle, they'll publish what they do, and then Canonical will publish what we do, and then you can make your own decisions about whether that gives you enough guarantee and protection for users. So I think that's one of the one of the intended benefits of the CRA is to give that transparency and let people know what's going on. So yeah, Giuseppe's asked, will we post this presentation? I think we will be posting it, Joao. Is that attached to the?
Yeah, this will be shared after the event is over. It's going to be attached.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, so I think that's kind of. No, there's another question about how new developers can handle these regulations. I guess that's quite a tough one, but I guess go in and understand what you need to do from a point of view of having the right practices and processes in place. Make sure that you're addressing security at the outset of developing a product. And as long as you take these security best practices in hand, then I think you should be okay. I don't know if you've got any further thoughts on that one, Joao.
Oh yeah, this is exactly what you said, right? So at its core, the CRA will only ask you to implement good security practices. So if you start like with a framework that's out there, you say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do risk-based assessments, I'm going to take risk-based decisions, and at the end, you should be 85%, 95% compliant. So then you need to understand the legislation and see, okay, what are the gaps here? So it all starts with good common cybersecurity practices, and then you just do like an assessment and you try to bridge the gaps, understanding the regulation, like context of your product, or what the scope that you're actually working on, and so on and so forth. And new developers, I always stress that out: documentation, right? You need to have documentation more than ever now. So it's a burden of the CRA, but it needs to be everything well documented right now. So I guess these would be the two main takeaways for me. Just start with good cybersecurity practices and then just bridge the gap later. And remember the documentation.
Yeah, okay, I think that's it for questions now. If you have any further further thoughts about the CRA, as I say, Joao mentioned the other webinar that you can go to, and I'm sure they'll be given more specific details, particularly with a sort of a product and a development focus there. So I recommend checking that one out next week.
Exactly. Stay tuned. You have the registration links. It's also posted on our LinkedIn webpage as well. You can just search there. You'll find the link to sign up. And hopefully we'll see most of you again next week on the webinar. Thanks everyone for joining. I know it took a little bit longer than we expected, but I think it was a good session, like the good contributions from Harry as well. And again, thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned for the next ones, and have a great rest of your day.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.